Welcome to Confessions of an EOS Implementer, a podcast by Talent Harbor. We share unique stories of EOS implementers and the companies they've transformed to give you a rare glimpse into the successes and the challenges of the system in action. I'm your host, Ryan Hogan. Let's jump in. Welcome to another episode of Confessions of an EOS Implementer, presented by Talent Harbor. Today, I am delighted to welcome Steve Morris to the podcast. Steve's a certified EOS implementer, but Steve has a really interesting story in his career with designing racing yachts, leading high-performing teams, and he's now taken these and applying them as a certified EOS implementer. And what you'll hear towards the end of the conversation is he's building a facility on his property where he can host retreats and bring people to him to really kind of help get high-performing teams out of the office so they can think and work on the business instead of in the business. But we really went deep into what he saw when he was working with the yacht racing teams or the sailing teams. We talked about the difference between a high-performing team and a not-so-high-performing team and how intentional culture plays a big role in that. We got into a little bit of a conversation over the difference between a team and family, because there's organizations that look at this differently. Some organizations look at employees as a high-performing sports team, and others think it should be more about a family mentality and trying to strike a balance there to understand how do you build culture built on trust and allow people to be vulnerable while still holding teammates accountable. So Steve and I had a great conversation, and can't wait for you to listen. Enjoy the show. One of the things I do want to talk about is your background in yachting and specifically yacht racing. I mean, that sounds very interesting. As 22 years in the Navy, I love ships and boats and water and things like that. But how does one get into yacht racing?
Well, so I grew up in New Zealand. And New Zealand's just this tiny little island, right, in the middle of the South Pacific there. And my family bought their first sailboat when I was 9 years old, and that was just how I grew up. We used to, our summer holidays were going away on the boat, and we would sail up and down the coast of New Zealand and go diving for crayfish and scallops and, just putting a line over the side and catching lunch. That was how I grew up. And so I was just very lucky that from that, I went to college, I studied mechanical engineering, and it's just, being in the right place at the right time that New Zealand was getting into the America's Cup in 1986. And it's so amazing because, there's a TV series on Netflix that in particular talks about the 1983 America's Cup in Newport, Rhode Island. Right. And just how Australia had challenged for the cup, and, they were 3 races each, and, it's best of 7. So it's down to the last race. And, like the last downwind run, Australia gets past and wins the America's Cup. And so a lot of people in the US have seen that, and they're kind of, that's, the America's Cup. But for me, that was kind of like, that was the amazing thing that blew open the America's Cup. Right, and got it down to Australia, and then got New Zealand then challenged for the Cup in 1986, and that really ignited this massive industry in New Zealand around the America's Cup. And so some funding came to the university where I was at, and I got to go do research on the wind flow around yacht sails. And so, like when you ask this very simple question about how did I get into it, it's like, well, back in 1983, the boat got around another boat. And they managed to blow open a trophy, that had been stuck for 150 years, right? And it just kind of had this massive leverage, around the rest of the world too, not just for me, right? I mean, it's affected thousands of other people's lives in a positive way.
And when you got into kind of the research and development and the funding that came through the university, eventually you got into kind of the commercial side of it or the outside of the institution.
Yes. So I was doing a master's degree, right, researching the airflow around yacht sails, and then I got a job. And so back in 1988, there was a couple of boats from New Zealand that were going to sail around the world in what was then called the Whitbread Round the World Yacht Race, later became the Volvo Ocean Race. And so I got a job, and I went from studying airflow in a lab to getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning and going to the gym. We had this amazing trainer who was a ex-Commonwealth gold medal weightlifter, all of about sort of 5 feet tall and just, 5 feet wide as well. And so that was a really different environment for me. And it was sort of my first real introduction to like being on a team, right? On a high performing team of people. And so I spent about a year and a half working with that boat and that crew and helping them get ready to go sail around the world.
And
So that was my introduction.
that's awesome. And when you talk about the team and you talk about the workout routines and kind of the things that change from the R&D side of it to like now kind of fully immersing yourself into what the team was trying to accomplish, obviously winning. Were you still doing the research and development, or is it like if you're on the team, like you can both sail and kind of be a part of the action and doing research behind the scenes, optimizing for wind and kind of all of those things that I'm sure come into yacht sailing?
Yes, so that's why they offered me a job, is because I had those sort of research, engineering based skills. So what I was doing for a year was helping them figure out, okay, so mapping out the performance of the boat relative to the wind. When the wind's coming from this way and we need to go that way, like what are the best sails, the best sail configuration to have up. So we did a lot of testing around that. And then I was also part of a team that was writing some software, which, these things are very common these days, but back in the 1980s, it didn't exist. Software to be able to take, the weather forecast and where we needed to go with the boat and the performance of the boat and put all of that stuff together to then come up with a prediction for which is the best track for the boat to sail. And like I say, this is commonplace software now. Back in 30 years ago, we had to write our own software for that. So that was very sort of highly technical, but very interesting part of what I was doing.
And this team, like, when you talk about the competition and you talk about what you guys are trying to accomplish at a team, like this is a high performance team. Are there things throughout your career that you've seen that were different about the sailing team and waking up and going to the gym and probably creating camaraderie and all of these things versus teams that maybe haven't been as high performing? Like what did that team do that made it elite and that allowed it to compete at the highest level?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. It's been like the last 30 years of my life sort of answering that question and piecing it together. And so it's kind of so interesting for me now, right? And just sort of like to fast forward to where I am today, being an EOS implementer, and in particular, the latest book that just got released about people. And the subtitle is Dare to Build an Intentional Culture. And why I find, yep, there you go, you've got it. Yep. Why I find that so interesting is because it takes me all the way back to working with sailing teams, these high performing teams. And, after I worked with the one boat, getting them ready to sail around the world, I then got a job actually designing sailboats. Came to Annapolis, Maryland, and spent the next 16 years working with lots of different high-performing teams and seeing like some teams work really well, right? And they go bring the team together and they go win around the world yacht race. Cool. Other teams, it just seems to be a lot harder. It seems to be like we're not getting the team together. There's something off about this team versus another team. And I didn't have those tools, at the time, right, to be able to really kind of see that and to pass it out and to understand why some teams made it and some teams didn't. But ultimately, what's in that book, People, and gets right back to the core of your question, is building an intentional culture, right? To me, that's the thing that I and they talk about it in people, like some cultures are just a happy accident, right? We just kind of arrived here, and I've seen that. I've been part of that without having an intention around what we were doing. It's just like, oh, this person's available there. Let's bring this person on, pull the team together. Like, who can we get? And then we have a bunch of people in a room, and without that intention around a culture, you kind of, it's a bit of a shot as to whether or not it's going to come together. But one of the most successful teams that I worked with in my career, what I see now looking back is they were so intentional about how they built the team. They had a core group, and then they would invite, another new person onto the team, and then make sure that that new person was really a great fit for the team, right? And they wouldn't just offer somebody a job. They would trial them. They would bring them into the team, have them work out with the team for a while, see how they fit. And then if it was a good fit, great, add that person to the team and then move on to the next person. And just that sort of stands out to me as being sort of one of these sort of shining examples of daring to build a team, and daring to build it through creating an intentional culture as you're doing it, and how successful that is when you follow that path versus the happy accident.
Yes. And would you say that talent or fit is more important? So let's say you've got a world-class sailor that understands in and out the wind, when to put sails up, when to bring them down, what side to be on, where to turn, whatever the case is. And I'm speaking a little bit out of ignorance because I don't understand sailing to that degree. I've sailed a couple lasers around the Annapolis area, but that's probably about the extent. When you look at the teams that were intentional with culture, would they at times pass up the better performer for someone that would fit or align more effectively with the team in place?
Yes, I think so. If I look at that one particular team that I've been talking about, I feel like that they did that. But of course, you do have to have both, right? I mean, you've got to have people who are a fit, but then also, in EOS terms, right? GWC, they get it, they want it, they've got the talent, they do have the skills to be able to operate, to do the function that's needed of them on the boat. I mean, it's so fascinating for me that all of the things that I do with my clients now, I can look back and see with these high performing teams, like, yes, these are things, actual things that do work when we have people who fit our core values, right? Who show up being part of the team. That works. And then we also need to have people that, are competent, can do their job. And of course, when we're talking about a high performing sailing team, I mean, this is Olympic class, gold medal level of performance, right? It's a thing bringing a team together, and I've seen sometimes, you trial somebody, you bring somebody onto a team in a sailboat and they kind of fit in, they get their role, or else it becomes apparent that, they don't necessarily have the talent or the skills that they need to be able to do what they need to do, unfortunately, right? I mean, you got to figure that out. So I think you need to have both ultimately, right? We need to have a cultural fit, and you need to also be able to excel at the function you need to do.
And when you talk about this idea of the right person, right seat, and the GWC, were the sailing teams, when we reference this idea of intentional culture, did the sailing team have like their core values identified and understood? Like, I think when we look at the scorecard, it's very easy on sports teams to understand the scorecard. Like, we're trying to win. How are we going to win? Yeah. We're going to do, these things. And so aligning around a scorecard of what we're trying to accomplish seems a lot easier on a team than it does a company where things might be convoluted. And that's why EOS implementers are incredible, because they can help really craft and refine that. Did you find that some of these teams would actually kind of pre-articulate or even document the type of human or the type of candidate that they were looking for? Or did they go and find the best people, and then this trial period that you talked about, it was do they gel with the team?
Yeah, so I think unfortunately, sort of looking back, I feel like it wasn't as explicit and intentional as, say, the work that I do now. I think it was probably much more sort of our culture is unwritten, right? It's sort of like this feeling, right? It's not documented. We don't have a set of core values on the wall. At least in terms of my experiences, I'm sort of thinking through most of the teams that I worked with. I just sort of really wonder. I think it just wasn't so much of a thing back then to talk about things that way, right? I mean, Jim Collins hadn't really written Good to Great. Um, he wrote that in about 2000 or so, I think, roughly. So just sort of, and Patrick Lencioni and things like, I mean, all of these sort of real building blocks of the work that we do now didn't exist 25 or 30 years ago, in this sort of the explicit sort of intentional state that they do now. So being much more unwritten, more of a feeling, then it's sort of like it's harder then to really kind of get, other than that sense, right, that you're talking about, which is, okay, let's get somebody, come join the team and we'll see how it feels, right?
When you think about this, I've heard two different sides to this in business, which is, are we operating as a sports team? Are we team? And historically, like I've kind of adopted that where I don't know why, but I don't like the word employees, and so we always would use the word teammates, and we were very intentional with this idea of teammates because it's less about, do I like that person, or like are we all kind of thinking the same way? And it's more about like high performing teams can understand what needs to be accomplished and figure out how to work together to accomplish whatever it is that they've set out. And that's very much been Netflix. Like Netflix is all about like, we are not a family, we are a team. More stuff that I've been reading lately, and I'm trying to, I don't know if it was in the People book or not, but I was reading something over the last couple of weeks, and it talked about this idea of when you think about the 5 dysfunctions of a team and that foundation being trust. One of the big things that comes along with trust is like you have to feel comfortable. You have to feel comfortable around the people that you're around. You have to trust them in order to be vulnerable. And now, if you have trust, you can start building in some of those other competencies. And what's interesting is there's been this idea of like, trust and love and comfort and all of these things is more like a family than it is a high performing sports team. And it begs the question, and it's something that I've been thinking about now for the last month or so, is like, should businesses look at the people that operate inside of them as a team or as a family?
Well, that's certainly, posing a good question there. As you were talking, I think there was a lot of things that were going through my mind about sort of that difference, and just also thinking back. I mean, right, you're talking about vulnerability-based trust being the foundation of, bringing a team together. And, as I think back, particularly to the beginning of my career, when you're on a team with a bunch of guys, like, this term vulnerability, that can be a touchy thing, right? Like how much do you sort of really open yourself up to being vulnerable, right? In this very sort of masculine, hard charging sports environment. Certainly, I think it's something that's talked about more now than, it was 30 years ago, for sure. But then, I think to sort of more fully address, so you're thinking about family, versus team, I think the family thing can get complicated as well, right? I mean, a lot of what we do in EOS is working with family businesses, right? And part of the difficulty of family businesses is actually teasing apart the roles, and we talk about being family and also being owners of the business, but then also people who are working in the business. And when you're working in the business, you're accountable. And so I think the challenge and what you're sort of looking at and trying to pass out there is, you know, taking the good parts of family, like we look after each other, we've got each other's backs, prepared to give each other grace, with the other side of it, which is, well, we still got roles and we still are actually running a business and we still do need to be accountable. And sometimes Uncle Bob might need to be moved on, right? If Uncle Bob's not meeting his sales quota, right? That's always the difficulty, like making those difficult decisions. So, it's probably not black and white one or the other, right? So,
Different times for different styles, or a
mm,
blend between the both. And like one of the things that you just talked about was this idea of like the measurement of performance, and making sure that we're still holding people accountable while at the same time, and I think you called it, giving grace. Maybe it's empathy, maybe it's understanding. Like there's a lot of different things, and it's balancing. Like it's almost like, I don't know. When people think about accountability, they think about like the negative connotation, or like that's mean. Like you got to be mean to hold people accountable, versus like it's nice to give grace and say like that's okay. We'll work on it together. Like when you think about those two things, how do you know when it's time? When like either a change or a tough conversation needs to happen? Because if you've spent a whole bunch of time, not you, but if a business owner or leader has spent a whole bunch of time creating this place of vulnerability where people feel comfortable, and through my experience, the one thing that completely degrades the trust and the vulnerability is terminations, right or wrong. Like there's people before in an organization that we've let go of where I was like, this was crystal clear that this person was not performing and they needed to go. And I thought that everybody else either saw the same thing or it was going to be a gigantic relief. And there's been occasions where that has happened, but more often than not, like people are shocked, they're surprised, they're questioning, they're thinking about like, well, if that person can be let go like that, then like, what am I doing? And so when I've gone through, tough conversations or terminations in the past, like I will see an immediate degradation in the trust and the vulnerability. And then you've got to work to build it back up, because everybody realizes like as much as a family as we are, or as much as like we all trust each other, like there still is a way that I could be terminated or fired from this position if I'm not holding up my side of the bargain. So how do you know when it's time to flip that switch? When it's time to say like, hey, we've given enough grace. Like I understand that there's things that continue to come up. However, like we need to see some change here. When do you flip that switch?
yeah, well, I think that's the business leader's hardest conundrum to figure out, right? I mean, that's the unenviable position of having to make a decision, a tough decision. And in my career and times in the past, like I've been challenged by that as well. Somebody, I remember a few years ago, somebody working for me. It's just like, oh, got a flat tire this morning, didn't make it to work. Okay, get that fixed. Let's move on. Now tomorrow I've got a doctor's appointment I got to go to. And so there's just sort of one of these things where one thing and after another, it sort of all mounts up to the point where you're talking about, which is you like got to sit down and have a hard conversation. And I think for me now, in terms of the work that I do, just yes, seeing that accountability is something different, right? That it's something about helping, right? So to your point, like to give some grace, to come in, to figure out how we can help, and you help, you try to help, but then ultimately somebody's got to step up and into the help that you're giving them, or not, right? I mean, I think that there becomes a choice there about who people are showing up as. And I think ultimately, unfortunately, yes, you were running a business. So if the person's not going to step up, if you've given them all the help you can, right, and they don't, it still isn't going to work out, then you've got to find another place for them. And I think Jim Collins talks about that in Good to Great. There's a place for everybody, right? And sometimes I think he makes this point, like it's actually being a disservice to people to hang on so long because they're not happy either. So I don't I don't think there's any easy answer to your question, Ryan. I think this is the hardest thing, right? And sort of right, really kind of getting a sense of what we can do to help somebody. Are they just going through a difficult time now and we'll get through it and then we're moving on? Or is this something larger, right? And I mean, some people you'll never know they had a flat tire on the way to work in the morning.
Yeah,
You'll never know.
They left their house in 30 minutes before they had to because they anticipated that things can go wrong on the way.
Right. You know, some people there's just like it just you never see that part, but other people it blows up to become a major thing, you know, in the workplace. And so, you know, that's a difficult thing to process through for sure.
That's you know, we throughout all of my businesses, like one of the things that we've tried to master is hiring, because what you're trying to do is vet or weed the people that are not going to be a fit. And back to what you said, like not being a fit doesn't mean that they are bad. Like I think all too often when we're like, hey, we need to make a change, it's like good, bad, evil, great, you know, all these different things. And like, no, it's just a matter of like, that individual will fit better at another organization where their values and the company's values align better. And like we've used a lot of different types of hiring processes in the past, and we were using Who for quite a bit, and we do like Who because it's got the 5-step process. It's got a couple different types of interviews. It's got the questions that it asks. And time again, like we continue to not hire the right people. And we do this at Talent Harbor now, but specifically for when we realized this, what we realized is like we were skipping over their background. Like we have over-indexed on experience and expertise and qualifications and all of these different things, and the core values becomes almost like an afterthought. And when you look at EOS has the people analyzer, and you were talking about this earlier, but core values and then GWC. And so our whole kind of mindset has been like, how do you pull that people analyzer to the hiring process? Have you seen, you talked about this a little bit with the sports teams, where they would bring people into the organization, they would test them out, they would see, maybe is it the right fit, is it not? What are some techniques or things that you've seen where people can do a better job vetting for, is this person a right fit for the organization before they're ever actually a full-time employee?
Yeah, so a lot of my clients grapple with this, same issue, and it's so what we tend to talk about is, in the interview process, right, to be able to go through, okay, this is who we are, these are our core values as a business, right? But then I think it becomes more effective then to also turn it around and say, okay, could you tell me some times or some instances? So, core value, go above and beyond. All right. So we go above and beyond, right, in this business. And let me show you what that looks like. But could you tell me some times when you've gone above and beyond in your business? And I think what I'm seeing, the feedback, that I get from a lot of my clients is that people are very, trained, they're coming into an interview very prepared for a sort of like a standard set of questions. And what I'm seeing a lot of is that people will go through an interview and oftentimes, the company will think, well, this will be a good fit. And then they show up as somebody different when they arrive. And so, yes, I've got clients that are sort of saying like, what are we missing here? Like, what's the disconnect? And I don't have easy answers for that either, other than just to keep asking questions in the interview process and have your, spidey sense of, is this person like really telling me an honest story, or are they, making something up, right? Or they're sugarcoating something? And I don't know of anything else other than just to keep trying to like get a real sense of who the person is in the process. Try to get down to that.
Yeah. It's such a, like, we want, especially in hiring, because like we don't want to hire the wrong person. I say this all the time. It's probably the eighth time I've said it on the recording. But Jack Welch used to say, or he said in his book Winning, that at the pinnacle of his career at GE, he's in the middle of the turnaround. He's doing all the things, and he's like the CEO that everybody wants to be. And at the pinnacle, he said he got hiring right 50% of the time. And so I used to tell myself that all the time in hiring at Hunt to Killer and Run for Your Lives and other places, of like, hey, you know, the best CEO in the world at a certain point in time said at the pinnacle he was 50. But you're right. And like, now that we all know that, we're trying to figure out ways to like quantitatively understand like if this person's going to be a fit. And so we gravitate towards like data and like what things can we use, what things can we standardize to properly vet these people coming through. And the reality is, like, there is qualitative, there is gut that goes into this. There is feel. And one of the things that we've been looking at that's worked incredibly well is, I don't know if you agree with this, but I feel like you can vet for expertise, you can vet for experience, you can vet for qualification, you can vet for the GWC fairly quickly. You can look at a resume. If you can scan a resume correctly, you can say most likely like they have the capacity, the capabilities to be able to get this job. Do they get it? Do they want it? We can flesh that out. And then you put them through a screening interview. And now you can kind of suss out some of that stuff, because what you're trying to do is predict future performance. So like we look at this at Talent Harbor of predicting future behavior and predicting future performance. And it's our kind of thought is that it only takes about an hour to understand to predict performance, because you can go in, you understand if they have the capability, and then you can ask a series of questions that will give some insight or background into how they performed at their last companies. And then you can run the reference check. So all of those things put together, let's say it's an hour and a half. And so we've really put a lot of time into the second interview after the core interview. Instead of getting into the experience, we get into this thing called the core values interview. And the first thing that we do is, without giving our core values or our clients' core values, is we dig deeper into like what their personal values are, and we come up with examples and stuff like that. And you're absolutely right. Like, the other part to this is like introducing your core values. This is what we stand for as an organization. Can you tell me a time in the past that, or, you know, what does this mean to you? And it's visual cues. Like there's nothing, like, quantitative is very hard in that. You can't quantify like somebody and how they act, how they behave, how they feel. And so like we're looking for facial cues. We're looking for like their face to light up. We're looking for elaborate stories that couldn't possibly be made up on the fly. I agree with you.
Yeah. Well, I think to me it's also I had a boss once who always thought, you know, you take somebody out and play a round of golf with them and see, because, you know, you can tell a lot about a person, right, in terms of when they're getting stressed, right, or how they interact with others, or what their core values are around, well, the ball's in the rough, am I going to, do I get a drop in, or, are we going to try and hit it out of the rough? And then, there's that other story, and I'm skipping on where it comes from, but a CEO who would take a interviewer out to lunch.
I knew it.
There you go, right? And then somehow have the order, the person's order get intentionally messed up, and see how they treat the server, right? And you can tell so much about somebody, I think, if are they respectful? Can they problem solve their way through that? Can they come up with a creative solution? Or, do they get less than pleasant, about the situation, right? Because we're going to have stress at work. And if you're going to flip out about your burger getting cooked wrong, this is not going to work, right? So
I love that example, and like we've been like debating internally about this, because it is one of the things that we recommend, not necessarily to go screw up the order, but like the round of golf or having someone go out to lunch or dinner, like especially if it's at the executive level. Once you start getting to like your top 2 or 3, like taking those individuals out to see how they act and behave in the wild, even getting partners together. So, bringing spouses, significant others, and like seeing how that engagement looks and interactions and things like that, you can tell a lot. But we were just Alana and I were just having this conversation, my partner, last week with this, and what her and I talked about was, if they don't do anything, so let's say you get the wrong meal and they just sit there and they accept it. Like, that could almost be as bad as like throwing your plate at the server. And like, you're looking kind of for somebody in between those two, because like you want someone that is assertive enough, is confident enough, and like knows what they want to say, like, hey, excuse me, I ordered this without mustard, or whatever the case is. While at the same time, like, not overreacting to a degree in which way they're degrading other human beings. So, yes, that's like top of mind.
I wonder what I would do. I'd probably just eat the sandwich and move on, right?
That's what I told. Like, so she said that, and I was like, well, damn it, I probably would have eaten the sandwich. Like, just because I don't know. Like, that's not. I don't know if I care that much about my lunch, where I do care about performance. That's so funny.
Yes. Place ourselves in the own situation. Would we hire ourselves for our own job?
When you look at like so communication, vulnerability, like a lot of this is critically important, and so it's not just about the people, but it's about being able to effectively communicate to the team, whether that's like the core values or the vision, or where you're going, the goals, why you're doing what you're doing. Are there things that you've seen from a degree of communication between high performing teams and not? Like, is this a matter of like the quantity of communication or the lack, or what have you seen as far as like effective communication between teams?
So I think that there's a lot that I sort of see in terms of talking with my clients, with EOS. I mean, one of the things that we talk about right at the very beginning of the journey is being great parents of your organization means you need to have a handful of rules. You need to repeat yourself often, right? And you need to be consistent. And I still see those as being sort of really fundamental bedrocks to communication. And just that there's some patience and, once again, some grace around that too. I do know that, so, in EOS, we teach our clients to have a quarterly state of the company address, right? As you're talking about, get out there and say, this is where we've been, this is where we are now, this is where we're going. I know it's a thing, right? That my clients will do this quarter after quarter after quarter, and still people will say, where are we going? And so I just, I counsel just, patience. You just got to put in the reps. And eventually they will get it. But you can do the best you can to communicate, but it's got to also be received. There's a listener who has to be able to bring it in too. So that's one thing, is sort of like some patience around just continually needing to reiterate, to repeat, to be consistent. This is where we are. This is where we're going, right? That's one thing. I think the other aspect of it, of course, is trying to sort of get some engagement around feedback. So in EOS, when I'm working with my clients initially, we'll have a quarterly meeting. The leadership team will decide what their priorities are. They will set rocks, being their priorities for the next 90 days. They will go out from that meeting, they'll tell the rest of the company, and then go to the departmental level and work with the departments to set their rocks in accordance. That's sort of like round one. But then to me, like round two is, okay, get the department meeting before the quarterly meetings, having their own quarterly meeting, get them to decide what their priorities should be for the next 90 days and what their hit list is, and then bring that to the leadership team. So we've got, a lot more input, and the leadership team can look across all of that and decide and pick out, yes, these are the consistent priorities, and then take that back, right? So now we've got sort of more of a virtuous cycle going from input to the leadership team back to the departmental level. And I've seen people who do that start to get more engagement and buy-in, rather than sort of having it all be top down. Now we've got a cycle of communication going.
That's really interesting what you just said. And I think we ran it the opposite, where the leadership team would do their quarterly, and then within 2 weeks, the departments would have their quarterlies. The more I think about what you just said, though, is really interesting, because the people that are closer to the problems usually understand like what needs to be done, like what should be at the top of the list. And you know, there could be a counter argument to that of like, yes, but leaders sit in lifeguard chairs. They have a better visibility on like what's coming downstream and things like that. But the counter argument to that would be, well, if you're setting the appropriate yearly goals and everybody can see how the organization is tracking towards that, then they already have the vision they need to be able to put together the things that need to get done. That's interesting. Have you received feedback on that? Because I like that idea better.
I haven't seen it done often, right? It typically sort of comes, as I said, towards the end of the journey that, you know, I go on with my clients. I think it's part of a larger thing when you talk about sort of communication. Like in the journey that I see a lot of my clients go on, we've gone from maybe a lot of times a single business owner, founder, right, has been the person doing it all, right? And then so the next step is, okay, let's build a leadership team, right? So it's not just you doing it all, but now we've got a group of people that are all looking at the problem about how we take the business forward. And then this is just the sort of like the next iteration of that in terms of being able to get input. It's not always easy. Like I know a lot of people sort of struggle at the departmental level in their departmental level 10s. Like I often hear feedback from my clients saying like, I'm the only one bringing the issues. Like no one else brings issues to the meeting, working on trying to fix that, right? Like, okay, get somebody else to run the meeting for a start, right? But it all feeds into, you were referencing Lencioni before, and like, you know, building this vulnerability-based trust at the base of any high-functioning team. But, you know, then that creates this environment where we can have some healthy conflict, right? And conflict is a hard word, but let's call it debate. Passionate debate. I think that can be the hardest thing to start pulling out of a team, not necessarily the leadership team, but the next level down in the organization. People aren't used to it. Like, I mean, I've got one team I've worked with that have just, it's taken them a year to get over the fact they had a very autocratic leader previously in the organization who said, this is where we're going, this is what we're doing. Everybody's, you know, just shut up and nod their heads and got to work. Now we have a completely different leader, different culture, and we're trying to get, you know, the rest of the team to step up and be owners of the organization. And it's not something you can, it's no magic wand. I can't wave a magic wand and have them just change the way they're being overnight. It's taking time for them to realize like, oh, I can put a suggestion up and it's not going to get shot down. It's not going to be used as ammunition to tell me why I'm wrong, right? Somebody's actually going to listen and they're going to do something with it. It's a very delicate balance, right? But it's got to come from the leader at the top has to create that environment to allow these things to happen.
When you think about the environment, does that kind of get back to your grace? So like let's say that there's an organization that's going from this like autocratic environment where it's top down, like it's essentially the military. Like, you know, we don't, I've been in the Navy for 22 years. I'm still in the Navy Reserves. Actually, I just got back from Houston about 24 hours ago for drill weekend. But like that's autocratic and top down. Like we're going to get orders, we're going to take orders. There's not much room for thinking. Like you can think about maybe how to get it done faster or how to be more efficient. But as far as like the direction and the decision has already been made. When you're trying to shift an organization from hierarchy and top down to more of, I won't say democratic, because like organizations should not be democratic, and I think you know, EOS preaches that of like, you know, someone needs to make the decision, but collecting all the input, getting the right ideas, like there very much is a you know, creating the right space for that to happen. What do you think the first thing an organization like that has to work on, that's coming out of that mode of like I do a great job here, and I do a great job because that person tells me what to do, and then I just do it, to like, oh wait, I have to take responsibility and initiative and bring my own thoughts and ideas. What are some of those keys, you think?
Well, I think part of, like, as I was talking about the environment, right, just still needs to be created, right, by the leader, that they need to create an environment where they do give people freedom, almost freedom to fail, right? And it's not through providing, that failure being ammunition to tell people, why they're deficient, but failure to celebrate that, well, you made a decision, you did the best you could, and this is the result we got, and we're going to learn from it, and we're going to move forward. And I think, so to me, it becomes part of a larger thing, and this is around culture, and it was sort of referenced in the book People, really talking about how people are showing up on a leadership team in terms of their energy, in terms of who they're being, in terms of how they see the world, how they see each other, and how they see themselves. So that's something I've been very keen and focused on more recently in my practice, is those three things, because I'm seeing increasingly like that is ultimately the big things and the little things about what creates the ability for a team to move forward. And so what I mean by that is, how people see the world, right? Internally, coming from inside, what's your inner stance about how you see the world? Is it a place of abundance? Is there enough out there for us, right? Do we have all of the work that we need right now? Or do you see the world as a place of scarcity? There's not enough. We're in competition. We're going to beat those people, right? And we're going to beat everybody else, including ourselves, until we get to the finish. It's sort of, you've lived in Annapolis, right? So all of the shops up and down Main Street in Annapolis have got those, the T-shirt shops. And I still like, those pirate T-shirts that say beatings will continue till morale improves, right? Everybody's laughing at them on Main Street, and I'm like, yeah, but that's how some companies actually run. It's not a joke.
Yes.
Right? So, but that is how, that's how somebody's showing up on a leadership team, right? How we see each other, right? And Brene Brown talks about this concept of, do you fundamentally see that everybody's doing the best they can, or not? I travel a lot for work. 2 weeks ago, I'm out there at Denver Airport, thunderstorms rolling through. It's a thing, flying in the summer, right? There's delays, there's ground stops going on, there's lightning outside. We don't want, the ground crew to be outside when there's lightning right on the tarmac, but somebody's going off at the gate agent, because their flight's getting delayed, right? The gate agent's doing the best they can, right? There's lightning outside, right? So how do you see other people as a fundamental thing? And that's what happens on a leadership team. And then the last part is, how do I see myself, right? Do I see myself as somebody who is creative, is capable, can figure out problems? Anytime I ever hear somebody say something like, I'm not good at math, I don't know how to manage people, I'm not a good speaker, like all of these things are somebody's self-identity, that, and these thoughts, the way, we come from internally comes out through our language, right? Because what we have feeling inside will dictate our thoughts, and our thoughts will eventually come out of our mouths in terms of the things that we say. And so in a book I was reading recently sort of really talked about, well, this culture of a team, like creating this environment, a team is actually the collection of the empowering or disempowering mindsets of all of the people involved. And I was thinking like, that's an interesting way of looking at it, right? Because if you've got a team sitting around the table and we're trying to figure out how to solve this conundrum, and somebody's sitting back because they feel like, oh, my voice doesn't count, or I don't know, I don't want to ask a stupid question, because I'm going to get shut down. I don't know anything about operations, or I don't know anything about sales, right? I mean, so you can imagine a circle of people around a table trying to solve a difficult problem, but everybody's got this little voice going on in their heads, right? And so if those are not empowering, creative, if they're mostly non-useful, disempowering stances, then the team's not going to get to where the team needs to get to. So that's been something that for me, really sort of going that next step of, okay, well, with EOS, we're putting a structure in place to enable this interaction. And now we've got to look at the energy, like what's going on with the people engaged in that interaction, to be able to take the business forward. So long-winded answer to your question about creating an environment.
It was good. It was a great, because you said a couple of things in there. You said a lot in there that was incredible. The two things that had me reflecting. The first is when you talk about getting shut down in a meeting. And so I was a part of a meeting this weekend in which somebody had an idea. And again, this is the difference between military and the civilian side. Well, not really. I think we see this all the time in the civilian side, but it's a difference in like how I think and operate on the civilian side than I do in the Navy. But I was sitting in a meeting, and a sailor had an idea. And so right when we got to the end of that slide, he said, hey, I've got an idea. And he outlined it, and someone else in the meeting shut it down immediately. Said, not the time and the place, pick it up offline. But I was actually interested in that idea. And so like now I was put in a weird dynamic of like, how do I engage? I don't want to get too much into this because I don't think my sailors listen to my podcast by any stretch. But I putting out our dirty laundry is probably not the best thing. How did I resolve that problem? Like the only thing I could think to do is pull that person aside after. So like pulled both of them aside. The first one to say, hey, that was a great idea. I'd like to learn more about it. And we went down that path. And then pulling together the other person, just saying like, hey, listen, I understand the intent and like we had to move on, but there's a different way to do that, which will keep people more engaged and keep the ideas flowing.
And there's some systems for doing that too. Like if we got a moment, like recently I was working with a team and, they were kind of, I would say, circling down, right, or spiraling down around a situation that was happening on the team. So I got them to take a break and sort of came back with some different energy and said, okay, we're going to put an issue out there, and the only things that you can respond to are, okay, what I like about that idea is, and to state that, and then the next person can respond with yes and, right? And this is an exercise that comes from positive intelligence, PQ, but it's just a way of what it did going around the table is it suddenly unlocked, it sort of got out of a downward spiral and got us into an upward spiral of taking an idea. Yes, what I like about that is we could generate more sales from that. Yes, and then we could go over into this market over here. Oh, what I like about that idea is, and then that was an amazing thing to see. And so just part of unlocking mindset, right? Like to get out of that spiral. Tools and techniques, I think, is always in some of these things, these sort of softer things about how do we work with what's going on inside with people. Well, there's things we can do.
The other thing you had talked about a little bit was this notion of failure. And when we were talking about like how to take autocracies or hierarchies, top down kind of chain of commands, and start to like really convert the thinking to have more ideas. By the way, the Navy has an actual program where they've recognized this, and it's like a 5-year program. It's called Get Real, Get Better. I did a whole thesis when I was the first time you and I talked. I think I was in Newport, Rhode Island. So I was going through war school or war college, but I spent 10 months like assessing, analyzing the rollout of this program, which intense there, but it's not where it needs to be. But this idea of failure and accepting failure, like that kind of gets back to some of the stuff we were talking about earlier, which is, when is the right time to have that like soft skill, empathy, giving grace versus like holding someone accountable and doing so in probably a different manner. When you were talking about that, what I thought about was like, you were talking about how do you get people to communicate, and like you want their ideas, and like their head's not going to get, chopped off if they fail at this. And it's almost like companies aren't seeking failure, they're seeking success, but the good companies understand that success comes from failures. Like there are 15 failures to get to that gigantic success, and failures are really just learning, like, oh, that didn't work, all right, next. And so like a certain tolerance level in, or acceptance in failure in like the idea, maybe even a little bit of the execution phase, because if it's a new idea, then you might not know how to execute it to ensure. And so maybe you're changing ideas, maybe you're changing execution, but you can still hold people accountable. Like once systems are in place, and for us in sales, we need to have 5 phone calls every single week, and that equates to something. Like that's a non-negotiable. If you start showing up and that's read every single week on the scorecard, we're starting to ask questions because it's already been validated and it's a proven process. But when it gets in the idea and the execution of something that is maybe new, or things that we're sourcing from the team, having a higher tolerance for failure, I think to your point is what we're searching for.
Well, so what brings to my mind listening, as you talk through that, is 2 things that we're doing as EOS implementers with our clients. Number one is helping them execute the current business really well, right? And so this is where, having a scorecard in place, right? Being able to document our core processes. And we talk about this idea of putting, your core processes in place as documented is not about having to micromanage your bad employees, but actually to free up the energy of your great employees, right? So that they can excel. But that's all sort of the current business. And then the second thing that you're doing is building a future business, right? Because we work with clients who want to grow, right? And so how do we build the future business? Well, we set that 3-year picture, the 1-year goals, and then we set quarterly rocks. Like, what are we going to do in the next 90 days that's going to end us up, at a 1 tick higher, maybe, or whatever it is, that we've taken a step to build that future business of where we're trying to get to. And so what I sort of see is, we try to get to 80% successful rock completion rate by the end of the quarter. That's kind of like the aim. But if a team, is feeling gutsy and they're going to take on some pretty big rocks for the quarter and we only get 60% of them done, like, is that a failure? Well, not necessarily, right? Because they aimed really high. I do like to say, well, we like to get our rocks done so we get the dopamine hit of getting the check on the box, but you don't want to set them too low either, right? Because then it's not challenging and we haven't done anything meaningful to build the future business. So there's got to be some tolerance in there, and maybe that having that 80% bar does it, right? To say, okay, we set 5 rocks, we got 4 of them done, 1 of them we didn't get done. Great job, team. Okay, let's move on to the next quarter, right? You got to try. Right? If we don't try, then we're just grow or die, right? Is one of our core values in EOS. So pick which one you want.
I love what you just said there about like the future business, like the 90 days, and it's like you're building the future business with your rocks, and then you've got the day to day, which obviously is captured on the scorecard. But like that is how it is. I've never heard it put like that, and that's it's a great way to think about it.
Well, it's a balance, right? Because rocks, a lot of people they take rocks and then they're like, oh my gosh, like, how am I going to get these done? Because I've got all of this stuff I'm doing on my day-to-day anyway. So it's a conscious way of being able to recognize that and to say, yes, you've got to execute current business really well. That's the scorecard. Yeah. But we're doing something else over here too, because we're growing.
What's your ideal client? Like, are you looking for local folks? Do you focus on a specific niche? Or are you just like anybody that wants to learn EOS? Like, I've got a lot of experience and I used to be on high performing yacht racing teams.
So that the answer to that question is changing as we speak. I do have clients. The bulk of my clients are here in Colorado, and I do have clients mostly back east in Maryland, Virginia, DC area. But I'm finding that I am doing a lot of traveling for them, and it's sort of got to a point where I need to stop doing so much traveling and continue to focus, because what else I'm doing here is I live on a 30-acre farm, and we are creating this permaculture orchard with healthy gardens where we're growing healthy food. and I'm creating a sacred space where my clients are going to come. And they're going to come and they're going to get reconnected in this lovely environment, reconnected with themselves, with each other, and get literally grounded with what's going on in their lives and their business. And so we're putting in greenhouses. We have a greenhouse that's nearing completion, and then I'm going to start building a barn space with meeting rooms. That's the background to the answer to your question is I need to focus. I've got my own rocks in terms of growing my future business, and that's creating this space. And we've already had a couple of sort of prototyping events here, feeding people food that we're growing from the farm, providing talks and other value adds to their being here. So building my future businesses, I need to put time aside for that over the next year. So I'm no longer taking out of state Colorado state clients out of Colorado because I've got to get my future business built here. But Colorado is where it's at.
I love that, by the way. You and I talked about that during the Discovery call, and I think I shared with you, like, that's kind of like when I think about where I want to be 10, 15 years from now, like, I want to build a compound. That sounds so dark and dreary. I don't know, a facility. And it very much aligns with what you're saying, because what we always found at any of our companies is it's once I was able to get the leadership team away from the office. And so we would, this was back when Airbnb was like just starting, and we would just go rent like big mansions in the middle of nowhere, like the foothills of Virginia or northern Pennsylvania. And we would just drive, we would take a 3-hour drive, and I would force everybody to listen to the 5 dysfunctions of a team. And most of them would throw things at me because I was driving as well. But just the break, like we would live together, we would cook together, we would do team building stuff together, and we would solve problems and build the future together. And the power of that has been lasting, and it's something that I want to do. And so I love that you're doing that, because I think it's invaluable to get people kind of out of their normal rhythm and space. Yeah,
no, I really see the difference when I work with teams, when we're using the conference room in their office. Someone's knocking on the door saying, hey, I've just got, 30-second question, versus when I get people out of that. And this environment here, this beautiful farm, we have a 14,000-foot mountain keeping her loving, caring watch over us as we do this work. Lovely lakes and cornfields all around. So it's just a very peaceful environment. And, as I was talking before about sort of really getting through to that inner stance, like what's going on inside. We've got to slow things down. We've got to get quieter, get rid of the noise and really start focusing in on that. So that's what I'm doing. And, in terms of clients in Colorado, I have an engineering background, design background, as we've been talking about. I do love working with technology businesses, engineering businesses, construction businesses. But at the same time, I've got all sorts of different clients, because ultimately I see it's about people. It's about who people are being. And so it's a curious thing for my career, starting off being an engineer on a team to now, talking about these things and being really dialed in on them. But I just love it. I'm very passionate about it. And I love being able to just find those things that we can unlock that get people to a place of more flow, more peace, more freedom, having a more wonderful life.
All right, Steve, last question. Someone just listened to all of that. They happen to be an engineering company in Denver, and they're looking for an implementer. How would they find you?
So they could reach out, through email. So I'm steve.morris@eosworldwide.com. You can find me on the EOS Worldwide website as well. But reaching out by email is probably the best step.
This has been an absolute blast. I don't think I've had anybody on the show, certainly not in yacht racing, but definitely not like in kind of this field of like high performing sports teams. And so the unique perspective that you brought was incredibly valuable. So thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate it. And we'll chat soon.
Thank you for having me. It's a privilege to be on your show and to to talk with you too. I think you've had an incredibly interesting career and a lot of good insights to bounce backwards and forwards. So I've had a blast too, Ryan.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve.
Confessions of an EOS Implementer is brought to you by Talent Harbor. To find out more about Talent Harbor and our fractional services and talent search solutions for businesses that operate on EOS, visit talentharbor.com. And then make sure to search for EOS Implementer in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And on behalf of the team here at Talent Harbor, thanks for listening.